am Courtney. I'm a 30-year-old lady who enjoys planning and statistics. My life is solid, and I work at a good job. People have always complimented me on my aptitude with numbers, which has been really helpful to me. But when I met Michael, everything was different. Michael and I met at a party. Normally, I'm not a party animal, but my friend Sarah talked me into going. She'd urged, "Come on, Courtney, you need to get out more." I was standing by myself at the party, clutching a drink, when Michael approached me. His smile put everyone at ease, and he was tall. "Hi, my name is Michael." Reaching out a hand, he replied, "I don't think we've met." I gave him a handshake. "I'm Courtney," he said. "So, Courtney, what brings you here?" I gave a shrug. "I was dragged here by my pal. I don't really enjoy going to parties." "Me neither," Michael chuckled. "But sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone." We conversed for some time. It was a pleasure to speak with Michael. He listened to me and made me smile. He talked to me about his passion for vintage films and his work at a neighborhood bookshop. I informed him about my interest in puzzles and my work as an accountant. As the evening wore on, we discovered ourselves seated apart from the throng, engrossed in our discussion. It was peculiar how effortlessly we could relate despite our extreme differences. Michael asked for my phone number after the party ended. "Courtney, I want to see you again. Could we perhaps go get coffee?" After hesitating, I nodded. After that night, we began dating. "Sure, that would be nice." We spent hours talking, watching films and going on dates. Michael made me feel unique. He was lovely and caring. One thing, though, worried me. Michael didn't make a lot of plans. He was the antithesis of me in that he lived in the now. I enjoy making plans because it gives me a sense of power. I mentioned this once. "Michael, do you not feel that you ought to plan more? Having a plan is crucial." Michael merely grinned. "Courtney, I am happy with my lifestyle. Planning is helpful, but occasionally you just need to go with the flow." I liked him too much to disagree with him, even though I didn't understand. As the months went by, our bond got deeper. Michael took me to a peaceful area near the river one evening. The stars were out and the air was crisp on this lovely night. Michael turned to face me and said, "Courtney, I love you." Although I am aware of our differences, I believe it is what makes us unique. "Are you going to marry me?" It stunned me. Though marriage was a significant step, I could see honesty and love in Michael's eyes. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you," I replied. And that's how things changed in my life. Michael was a nice, laid-back man who lived in the present, and I, Courtney, the woman who loved planning and numbers, was going to marry him. It was a surprise, but that's the way life can sometimes be. You never know what to expect. I had envisioned a small wedding with only close friends and family, a straightforward ceremony, and perhaps dinner afterwards when Michael and I made the decision to tie the knot. However, things did not turn out how I had planned. To share the news, we met the parents of each other. My folks took a quick liking to Michael. My father shook Michael's hand and stated, "He's a simple, honest man." Conversely, Michael's parents appeared relieved. "It's good that you found someone serious," sighed Margaret, his mother. Michael and I got down with our parents and began to arrange the wedding. A simple wedding was what I had in mind. I started to look to Michael for encouragement. Margaret had different views, but he nodded in accord. "Oh no, sweetheart. Our only son is Michael. Our wedding has to be really large. We should invite all of our friends and relatives. It must be magnificent." Margaret resisted my attempts to argue, saying, "That's not what we want." But Michael wasn't on board with me. "Kearney, Mum knows best. Let's comply with her wishes." And so the planning for the wedding started. It was not at all what I had hoped for. Strangers I had never met were invited, and the guest list kept becoming longer. Everything was over the top. The decorations were lavish, and the space was enormous. I tried to talk to Michael one day when we were tasting cakes. "Michael, this is just too much. We didn't intend for this." But Michael just shrugged. "It's just one day, Courtney. Let's make everyone happy." The wedding day arrived. I stood in a dressing room, wearing a dress that was too big and too fancy. Sarah was there, trying to cheer me up. "You look beautiful, Courtney." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish this was different." As I walked down the aisle, I saw so many faces, most of which I didn't recognize. The ceremony was a blur. I said, "I do," but my heart was heavy. The reception was even worse. Loud music, too many people, and Margaret hovering around, making sure everything was as she wanted. At one point, I stepped outside for some air. Michael found me. "Hey, are you okay?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "This isn't what I wanted, Michael. This isn't us." Michael took my hand. "I know, Courtney, but it's just one day. We have our whole lives ahead of us." I wanted to believe him, but standing there, surrounded by a celebration that felt more like an ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. I loved Michael, but our wedding, something that was supposed to be about us, had turned into something unrecognizable, and that worried me. The days after the wedding were supposed to be happy, but they weren't. Michael and I settled into our new life, but something had changed. And then Margaret came into the picture in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there with a suitcase. "Margaret, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" I asked, confused. "Oh dear, I thought Michael told you. I'm staying with you for a while. My house is being renovated," she said, pushing past me. I was stunned. Michael hadn't mentioned anything. I called him at work. "Michael, why didn't you tell me your mom was staying with us?" "Oh, I forgot. It's just for a few weeks, Courtney. It's not a big deal," he said casually. But it was a big deal. Margaret didn't just stay with us. She took over our lives. She had opinions on everything, what we ate, how we cleaned, and especially how we spent our money. One evening, I came home to find Margaret sitting at the kitchen table with our bills spread out in front of her. "What are you doing, Margaret?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm looking at your expenses. You're spending too much. As a family, we need to save," she said, not looking up. I was shocked. "Margaret, these are our personal finances. It's not your place." Margaret finally looked at me. "As your mother-in-law and an elder, it is my place. I'm just trying to help." I wanted to argue, but I knew it wouldn't help. I walked away, feeling frustrated and invaded. The situation got worse. Margaret criticized everything I did. One Saturday, I was making breakfast when she walked into the kitchen. "You're making pancakes? That's too many carbs. You should make something healthier," she said, frowning. I took a deep breath. "Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I can make my own decisions about what I eat." She tutted. "I'm just saying a wife should take care of her health." I felt my anger rising, but before I could say anything, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is telling me how to cook now," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Michael looked uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe you should let Courtney do her thing." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Fine, but don't blame me if things go wrong." That night, I tried to talk to Michael. "I can't live like this. Your mother is controlling everything." Michael sighed. "She's just trying to help, Courtney. She's old and set in her ways." "But this is our home, Michael. We should make our own decisions," I argued. Michael didn't say anything. He just went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had reached my limit with Margaret's constant meddling and criticism, especially regarding our finances. It was time to take a stand. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, I decided to bring up the subject. "Margaret, I've been thinking," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "How about we do an experiment for 1 month? Let's keep separate budgets for our expenses, then we can compare and see who's more efficient with money." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "An experiment? Interesting. You think you can manage better than me?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." Michael looked uneasy. "Courtney, is this necessary?" "Yes, Michael, it is." "I think it's a fair challenge," I said firmly. Margaret smiled, almost smugly. "All right, dear. Challenge accepted." So, the battle of budgets began. I kept meticulous records of every penny I spent, making sure to be as efficient as possible. Meanwhile, I noticed Michael sneaking extra cash from the joint account, but I didn't say anything. The month flew by, and soon it was time to compare our expenses. We sat down at the dining table, each with our records. "Let's see what you've got, Courtney," Margaret said with a confident smile. I laid out my documents showing every transaction and bill. "As you can see, I've managed to save quite a bit this month, even with all the regular expenses." Margaret looked over the papers, her smile fading slightly. "Not bad, but let's see what Michael has." Michael cleared his throat. "Well, I didn't spend much, just the usual stuff." I decided it was time to reveal what I knew. "Michael, what about the extra money you took from our joint account?" Michael's face turned red. I needed it for some personal things." I pulled out the bank statements from the joint account. "Here's the proof. Your spending was higher than mine this month." Margaret's face was a mix of surprise and anger. "Michael, you lied. Why?" Michael didn't have an answer. He just looked down, embarrassed. I turned to Margaret. "As you can see, I'm quite capable of managing our finances efficiently." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she looked up, her expression hard. "Fine. You've made your point. But this doesn't change anything. I still believe I know what's best for this family." I let out a sigh. It was a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. Margaret's control over our lives was still a problem, and Michael's lack of support was even more concerning. But at least I had proven my point. I was good with numbers, and I knew how to manage money. It was a start, but I knew there were more challenges ahead. The air was tense after the budget challenge. Margaret's attitude towards me hadn't improved, and Michael was still avoiding any confrontation. I knew something had to give, and soon it did, but not in the way I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when Margaret walked in, her expression stern. "Courtney, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. I turned to face her. "Okay, Margaret, what's on your mind?" "It's about your attitude towards money. You're too controlling, too greedy. It's not healthy," she accused. I was taken aback. "Greedy, Margaret? I'm just trying to be responsible with our finances." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're hoarding. You don't want to share. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family." I felt my frustration rising. That's not true. I work hard for my money, and I think it's fair to want to manage it wisely. Before I could say more, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" "Your wife," Margaret said, turning to him, "is too obsessed with money. It's not right." Michael looked at me, then at his mother. "Courtney, maybe you should ease up a bit. Mom has a point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, you're taking her side after all the evidence I showed you." Michael shrugged. "I just think we should all get along." That was the last straw. I stormed out of the kitchen and went to our home office. I pulled out the documents I had been keeping, proof of all the money Michael had been giving to Margaret without my knowledge. I gathered everything and went back to the kitchen. Okay, you want to talk about money? Let's talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. I laid out the documents on the table, bank statements, receipts, everything. Here's proof of all the money Michael has been giving you, Margaret. Most of it is from my earnings. Margaret's face turned red. That's none of your business. He's my son and he's helping his mother. I looked at Michael. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Michael looked away. I just wanted to help her. I turned back to Margaret. And what about the wedding? You wanted a grand affair. Who do you think paid for that? It was me, against my wishes. Margaret was silent, her mouth a tight line. I took a deep breath. I've had enough. This is not how a family should be. I work hard for my money, and I won't be accused of being greedy or controlling for wanting to manage it responsibly. Margaret looked at me, her eyes cold. So what are you going to do? I met her gaze. I'm going to think about what's best for me. This can't go on. With that, I left the room. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sadness. My marriage was crumbling, and the family I had hoped to be part of was nothing like I had imagined. It was time to make some tough decisions, but for the moment, I just needed some space to think and to breathe. The house felt colder. The walls seemed to echo my thoughts. I spent the next few days mostly in silence, contemplating my next steps. I knew a conversation with Michael was inevitable, and it came sooner than I expected. It was a quiet evening when Michael walked into the living room where I was sitting, a determined look on his face. We need to talk, Courtney, he said. I nodded. Yes, we do. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking, and I've made a decision. I waited, my heart pounding. I want things to go back to how they were. I want to spend my money how I like. I don't want to argue about it anymore, he said. I looked at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. Michael, it's not just about the money. It's about respect, trust, and partnership. We're supposed to be in this together. He shook his head. I can't live like this, constantly being questioned and judged. So I'm giving you an ultimatum. Let me spend without restraint or we get a divorce. His words hit me like a punch. I felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. You're giving me an ultimatum? Yes, he said firmly. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Okay, Michael, if that's how you see our marriage, then I agree to the divorce. He seemed taken aback. You agree? Just like that? I stood up, feeling a sense of resolve. Yes, just like that. I won't be part of a marriage where my partner doesn't respect me or our future together. I deserve better. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Courtney, are you sure? I nodded. Yes, I'm sure. I want a partner who stands with me, not against me, and clearly that's not you. Michael didn't say anything more. He just turned and left the room. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The ultimatum was meant to corner me, but instead, it had set me free. The house felt different after Michael left, quiet, empty, but it was a space I was ready to reclaim. I began by reorganizing, rearranging furniture, and redecorating. It was therapeutic, a way of wiping the slate clean. One evening, while sorting through old photographs, my phone rang. It was Sarah, a dear friend I hadn't seen in months. Courtney, how are you holding up? Sarah's voice was warm, laced with concern. I'm managing, Sarah, just taking it one day at a time, I replied. I can't believe Michael did that. And his mom, I never trusted her, Sarah added. I let out a soft laugh. You and me both, but it's over now. I'm focusing on what's ahead. You're so strong, Courtney. Hey, why don't we catch up soon? It's been too long, Sarah suggested. That sounds perfect. Let's do it, I agreed, feeling a flicker of excitement. We met the next evening at a cozy cafe, a place brimming with memories. Sarah's presence was comforting, a reminder of life beyond my recent troubles. Courtney, I'm so proud of you. You're handling this like a champ, Sarah said as we sipped our coffee. I shrugged modestly. I don't have a choice, Sarah. I refuse to let this break me. You're amazing. Remember, I'm always here if you need anything, she said, squeezing my hand across the table. I smiled genuinely. Thank you, Sarah. That means the world to me. Life gradually regained its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, found solace in quiet evenings with books, and poured myself into my work. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. Then one day, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was Michael. Courtney, I want to apologize. Can we talk? His voice was unsteady. I hesitated but answered. Go ahead, Michael. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Living with my mom is impossible. She's never satisfied, and I can't keep up with her demands. I don't have enough money. I need to come back home, he pleaded. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. Michael, I accepted your apology, but it changes nothing. We had our time, and it's over now. I've moved on. Courtney, please. I cut him off. No, Michael, this is my life, and I'm not going back to how things were. Take care of yourself. Hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had picked up the pieces of my shattered life, and I wasn't about to scatter them again. I was whole on my own, and that was all I needed. Months had passed since the divorce was finalized, and each day felt like a step forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was mine, and I cherished every bit of it. My life had taken a turn, but I was in control now, steering it in a direction that felt right. One afternoon, as I sat in my office crunching numbers, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. Hey, Liv, how about dinner tonight, just the two of us? I smiled and quickly typed a response. Sounds great, Dad. See you tonight. Every dinner I had with my dad was memorable. It was him who instilled in me the values of independence and strength. Our favorite diner, which was like home to us, was where we first met. Dad gave me a sweet look as we took our seats in the booth. How are you holding up, kiddo? I'm doing fine, Dad. I really am. Though it's been difficult, I'm getting by, I replied truthfully. He gave a nod. Kearney, you are strong. Has been for all time. I'm happy for you. We discussed everything and nothing, work and life. It felt familiar and reassuring. Later that week, I ran into Emily, an old acquaintance at the grocery store. It felt good to see her again after all these years of not talking. Courtney, a long time ago. How are you doing? Emily smiled warmly to greet me. Hi, Emily. I am doing fine. Thank you. Life has been interesting, I laughed in response. We caught up on old times over a lengthy conversation. Emily remarked, You seem different, Courtney, before they parted. More tranquilly. I paused to reflect. I suppose I am. After a long time, I'm at last in a decent place. Days became weeks, and weeks become months. I had taken back my life and my space. I spent time with friends, engaged in pastimes I had long since abandoned, and discovered happiness in the small things. One evening, my neighbor Mrs. Thompson passed by while I was enjoying tea on my veranda and taking in the sunset. She was an old woman, perceptive and always kind. Good night to you, Courtney. You look content these days, she said, resting her cane on her walking stick. I gave her a smile. Mrs. Thompson, good evening. Yes, I'm content. I'm there, even though it took some time. She gave a nod of approval. Well done, sweetheart. Each of us deserves to be happy. I sat there, taking in the quiet of the evening as she left. Even though the path had been lengthy and full of ups and downs, Looking back, I saw that every step and mistake had brought me to this point. I had given up a husband and an annoying mother-in-law, but I had gained something much more valuable, me. With a heart strong enough to begin over and a calculator in my head, I was perfect just the way I was.
I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, taking a deep breath before knocking on Jacob's door. My fiancé and I had been living separately while we planned our wedding, but today was the day we'd finally start looking at houses together. As I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open. Oh, I stumbled back, startled to see not Jacob, but an older woman with piercing blue eyes and a severe expression. "I'm sorry, I must have the wrong—" "You must be Beth," the woman said, her voice clipped. "I'm Elaine, Jacob's mother." I blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. Jacob's mother passed away when he was young." Elaine's lips thinned into a tight smile. "His adoptive mother, yes, I'm his biological mother." My mind reeled. In the 2 years we'd been together, Jacob had never mentioned a biological mother. Before I could formulate a response, Jacob appeared behind Elaine, his face pale. "Beth, I can explain," he started, but Elaine cut him off. "There's nothing to explain, Jacob. I'm here now, and it's time we were a family again." I looked between them, my stomach churning. "Jacob, what's going on?" He stepped around Elaine, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, Beth. I only found out recently myself. Elaine contacted me a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." Elaine's eyes narrowed as she watched Jacob take my hand. "Well, now everyone knows. Shall we go inside? I've made lunch." I hesitated, but Jacob squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's okay," he murmured. "We'll talk about this." As we entered the apartment, I couldn't help but notice how Elaine had made herself at home. Her coat was draped over the back of Jacob's favorite chair, and the air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar cooking. Sit, Elaine urged, ushering us to the table. "I've made Jacob's favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes." I frowned. "But Jacob's a vegetarian." Elaine waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense, my boy loves a good pot roast." Jacob cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Elaine, I haven't eaten meat in years." A flicker of annoyance crossed Elaine's face before she covered it with a smile. "Well, more for us then. Beth, you'll have some, won't you?" "I'm not really hungry," I said, my appetite gone. "Jacob, can we talk for a moment, privately?" Before he could answer, Elaine interjected. "Now, Beth, there's no need for secrets. We're all family here." I bristled at her presumption. "With all due respect, Elaine, I've only just met you, and Jacob and I need to discuss this situation." Elaine's eyes flashed. "Situation? I'm his mother. I have every right to be here." Jacob stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Elaine, please, Beth's right. We need a moment." As Jacob led me to the bedroom, I could feel Elaine's eyes boring into my back. Once the door was closed, I turned to Jacob. "What the hell is going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. "I'm so sorry, Beth. I should have told you sooner. Elaine contacted me out of the blue a few weeks ago. She claims she gave me up for adoption when I was a baby, but now she wants to reconnect. And you believe her?" Jacob shrugged helplessly. "I don't know what to believe. She has documents, photos. I was going to tell you, I swear. I just wanted to be sure before I brought it up." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "Okay, so what now?" Before Jacob could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. "Jacob? Is everything all right in there?" I groaned quietly. "She's not going to make this easy, is she?" Jacob squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out together, okay? I love you." As we opened the door to face Elaine, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. Little did I know just how right I was. I never imagined my wedding planning would involve fending off an overzealous future mother-in-law, but here I was, staring at Elaine across the bridal boutique. She'd somehow wormed her way into our dress shopping appointment, and now she was eyeing the gowns with a critical gaze that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Beth, darling," Elaine cooed, holding up a frilly monstrosity. "This would look divine on you. So traditional, so proper." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Elaine, but I was thinking of something more modern." Her lips tightened. "Modern? But Jacob loves classic styles. Don't you want to please your husband?" Before I could retort, my best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, intervened. "I think Beth knows what Jacob likes better than anyone." right, Beth?" I nodded gratefully, but Elaine wasn't finished. She sidled up to me, her voice low. "You know, dear, I've known Jacob his whole life. Even if we were separated for a while, I know what's best for him." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was Jacob's mother, allegedly. We still hadn't confirmed her story, but Jacob seemed convinced. I tried to focus on the dresses, but Elaine's constant commentary made it impossible. After an hour of thinly veiled insults and helpful suggestions, I was at my wit's end. "I think that's enough for today," I announced, my voice strained. "Thanks for coming, Elaine, but Sarah and I can handle the rest." Elaine's eyes flashed. "But we've only just started, and I haven't even shown you the guest list changes I've made." I froze. "Guest list changes?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, just a few additions. Some old friends of mine who'd love to see Jacob, and I took the liberty of removing a few of your college friends. We need to keep things classy, after all." That was the last straw. "Elaine," I said, my voice tight, "this is our wedding. Jacob's and mine, not yours. You don't get to make changes to our guest list or anything else." Her face darkened. "I'm his mother. I have every right." "You've known him for 3 weeks," I exploded. "I've been with Jacob for 2 years. I know him, I love him, and I'm the one marrying him, not you." The boutique fell silent. Elaine's face contorted with rage, but before she could speak, my phone rang. It was Jacob. I answered, grateful for the interruption. "Beth?" Jacob's voice was strained. "Where are you? Is my mother with you?" "We're at the bridal shop. Why? What's wrong?" He sighed heavily. "I just got home. The apartment's a mess. Looks like someone's been going through our things. And there's a note. From Elaine." My blood ran cold. I looked at Elaine, who was watching me with an unsettling smile. "What does it say?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "It says she's fixing things, making our home more suitable. Beth, I think she broke in while we were out." I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay calm. "Jacob, I need you to listen to me. Your mother is here right now. She's been interfering with the wedding plans, changing our guest list without permission. And now this? We need to talk about boundaries." There was a long pause. "You're right," he said finally. "I'll meet you at the shop. We'll deal with this together." As I hung up, Elaine approached, her face a mask of concern. "Is everything all right, dear? Jacob's not having second thoughts, is he?" The implication made my blood boil. "No, Elaine, he's not. But we do need to have a serious conversation about boundaries." Her eyes narrowed. "Boundaries? But we're family now. There are no boundaries in family." As Jacob's car pulled up outside the boutique, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. One way or another, this ended today. Our wedding, our lives, depended on it. I smoothed my dress and took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Today was supposed to be a joyous occasion, my bridal shower. My best friends had planned everything, and I was determined to enjoy it, despite the cloud of tension that had been hanging over us since Elaine's arrival in our lives. As I entered the restaurant's private room, I was greeted by cheers and hugs from my closest friends and family. The room was beautifully decorated with soft pink and white flowers, and a table laden with gifts caught my eye. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax and bask in the love surrounding me. That moment was short-lived. My phone buzzed insistently in my purse. I ignored it at first, but when it rang for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, I excused myself to check it. My heart sank when I saw Jacob's name on the screen. "Beth?" His voice was strained. "I'm so sorry to bother you during your shower, but there's been an accident. Elaine's in the hospital." My blood ran cold. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She says she fell down the stairs at her apartment. She's asking for me and for you." I closed my eyes, torn between concern and suspicion. "Jacob, I know. I know," he interrupted. "But she's alone, Beth. She doesn't have anyone else. Could you come? Please?" I glanced back at the room full of my friends and family, all gathered to celebrate our upcoming wedding. With a heavy heart, I agreed. When I returned to explain the situation, Sarah pulled me aside. "Beth, don't you think this is a little convenient?" she whispered. "Your bridal shower just happens to be interrupted by Elaine's emergency?" I nodded, the same thought having crossed my mind. "I know, but what can I do if she's really hurt?" Sarah squeezed my hand. "Just be careful, okay? That woman gives me the creeps." An hour later, I found myself in the hospital waiting room with Jacob. A nurse approached us, looking confused. "Mr. Reeves, your mother is asking for you, but..." Well, there seems to be some confusion. She's not actually injured. Jacob and I exchanged glances. What do you mean? He asked. The nurse lowered her voice. She came in claiming she had fallen, but there are no signs of injury, not even a bruise. When we tried to discharge her, she became agitated. My suspicions confirmed. I felt a surge of anger. Jacob, she faked this. She did this to ruin my bridal shower. Before Jacob could respond, we heard Elaine's voice echoing down the hallway. Jacob, my boy, where are you? I need you. We followed the sound to find Elaine sitting up in a hospital bed, looking perfectly healthy. When she saw us, her face lit up, but then fell when she noticed me. Oh, Beth, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You didn't have to come. I know how important your little party was. I bit back a retort, but Jacob spoke up. Mom, what's going on? The nurses say you're not hurt. Elaine's eyes widened innocently. Not hurt? But I fell. I could have died, Jacob, and all Beth cares about is her party. That was the last straw. Enough, I shouted, surprising even myself. Elaine, this has to stop. You didn't fall. You made this all up to sabotage my bridal shower and manipulate Jacob. I'm done playing nice. Elaine's face contorted with rage. How dare you? Jacob, are you going to let her speak to your mother like this? We both turned to Jacob, who looked torn. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No, Jacob. It's time to choose. Either you set clear boundaries with your mother right now, or... I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Or I'm calling off the wedding. The room fell silent. Jacob's eyes widened in shock, Elaine's narrowed in triumph, and I stood my ground, heart pounding. Everything hinged on Jacob's next words. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. Jacob had been gone for 3 days on a business trip, and I was counting the hours until his return. After the hospital incident, he'd finally set some boundaries with Elaine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. A sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. My heart sank. Elaine stood on our doorstep, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered on her face. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Elaine, what are you doing here? She brushed past me, entering without invitation. Oh, Beth, dear, I thought you might be lonely with Jacob away. I've come to keep you company and help around the house. Before I could protest, she was in our kitchen, skiing at the dishes in the sink. My, Jacob can't come home to this mess. Let's get started, shall we? For the next few hours, I found myself trapped in a bizarre domestic nightmare. Elaine critiqued every aspect of our home, from the way I folded laundry to the contents of our refrigerator. Kale chips? Quinoa? She wrinkled her nose at our health food. No wonder you're so thin, dear. Jacob needs a woman with some meat on her bones. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that engaging would only make things worse. But as the day wore on, my patience wore thin. Elaine, I said finally, as she rearranged our bookshelf for the 3rd time. I appreciate your help, but I can manage on my own. She turned, eyes flashing. Can you? Because from what I've seen, you're hardly fit to be a wife, let alone a mother. The words hit me like a slap. Excuse me? Oh, don't act surprised. Elaine's voice dripped with disdain. Your career woman lifestyle, your modern ideas about marriage, it's all wrong for Jacob. He needs a traditional family, with a wife who knows her place. I felt my anger rising, but before I could respond, Elaine's eyes landed on a framed photo of Jacob and me. In one swift motion, she knocked it off the shelf, sending it crashing to the floor. Oops, she said, not sounding sorry at all. How clumsy of me. As I knelt to pick up the shattered glass, a realization hit me. This wasn't about helping or even about criticizing me. Elaine was trying to erase me from Jacob's life, piece by piece. I stood, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Elaine, I think it's time for you to leave. She laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. Leave? Oh, no, dear. I'm not going anywhere. This is my son's home, and I have every right to be here. No, you don't. I moved towards the door, opening it wide. Jacob and I are engaged. This is our home, not yours. Now, please leave before I call the police. Elaine's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little... She lunged forward, her nails raking across my cheek. I stumbled back, shocked by the sudden violence. In that moment, something in me snapped. I grabbed Elaine's arm, my grip firm but not bruising. Get out now. For a moment we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then slowly Elaine straightened up. This isn't over, she hissed. Jacob will see you for what you really are. As the door slammed behind her, I sank to the floor, my hand touching the scratch on my cheek. Tears welled up, a mix of anger, fear, and frustration. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, dialing Jacob's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Jacob," I said, my voice breaking. "We need to talk. As soon as you get home. I can't do this anymore. Something has to change." As I ended the call, I looked around our apartment, now bearing the scars of Elaine's visit. I knew I was at a crossroads. Either Jacob would finally see the truth about his mother, or I'd have to make the hardest decision of my life. Either way, when Jacob returned, nothing would ever be the same. I paced our living room, my nerves frayed to breaking point. Jacob's key turned in the lock, and I froze, my heart pounding. He entered, his tired smile fading as he took in my disheveled appearance and the lingering chaos from Elaine's visit. "Beth? What happened?" I burst into tears, the stress of the past few days finally overwhelming me. Jacob rushed to my side, enveloping me in his arms. Through sobs, I recounted Elaine's intrusion, her cruel words, and the physical altercation. Jacob's face darkened with each word. "I can't believe she'd go this far," he muttered, gently touching the fading scratch on my cheek. "Jacob, we can't go on like this," I said, pulling away to look him in the eye. "Your mother is tearing us apart. She's manipulative, she's cruel, and I'm afraid of what she might do next." He nodded slowly, a pained expression on his face. "You're right. I've been in denial, hoping she'd change, but this is unforgivable." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Jacob moved to answer it, but I grabbed his arm, shaking my head frantically. "Jacob? Beth? I know you're in there." Elaine's voice, shrill and angry, carried through the door. "Open up this instant." Jacob's jaw clenched. He strode to the door, throwing it open. "That's enough, Mom. You need to leave, now." Elaine's eyes widened in faux innocence. "Leave? But darling, I've brought dinner. I thought we could all talk, clear the air after that unfortunate misunderstanding with Beth." I stepped forward, finding strength in Jacob's presence. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Elaine. You attacked me." "Attacked?" Elaine laughed, the sound grating. "Oh, please, you're so sensitive, dear. A little constructive criticism, and you fall to pieces. Jacob, surely you see how unstable she is?" Jacob's voice was cold. "The only unstable person here is you, Mom. I've seen the truth now, and I won't let you hurt Beth or come between us anymore." Elaine's facade crumbled, her face contorting with rage. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, I gave you life. I found you again. And this is how you repay me?" "You didn't find me," Jacob said quietly. "You've been lying this whole time, haven't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Elaine's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Jacob continued, his voice gaining strength. "I called the adoption agency while I was away. They have no record of you. You're not my biological mother, are you?" Elaine's composure shattered completely. "No, you can't take him from me again." She lunged forward, her hands clawing at Jacob. I reacted instinctively, stepping between them. Elaine's nails raked across my arm, drawing blood. Jacob pulled me back, pushing Elaine away. "That's it," he growled, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the police." Elaine's eyes darted wildly between us. "You wouldn't dare. I'll tell them you attacked me. Who do you think they'll believe? A sweet, helpless old lady, or you two?" My blood ran cold at the threat, but Jacob didn't waver. "Go ahead. We have security cameras in the hallway. They'll show exactly what happened." The fight seemed to drain out of Elaine. She sagged against the doorframe, suddenly looking every bit her age. "Please," she whispered, "don't send me away. I have no one else." For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in Jacob's eyes. I squeezed his hand, reminding him of everything we'd been through. Jacob took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, but you need help. Professional help. We can't provide that, and we can't let you continue to hurt us." As Jacob dialed 911, I watched Elaine crumple to the floor, her sobs echoing in the hallway. Despite everything, I felt a pang of pity. But as I looked at Jacob, his face set with determination, I knew we were making the right choice. When he hung up, Jacob turned to me. "Beth, I'm so sorry for everything, but I promise you it ends today. We're going to start fresh, just the two of us." I nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. As we waited for the police to arrive, I realized this was just the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. one without Elaine, but full of challenges we'd have to face together. I breathed in the crisp morning air, savoring the peace of our new neighborhood. It had been 3 months since we'd moved, leaving behind the chaos Elaine had brought into our lives. Jacob and I were finally settling into a routine, our wedding plans back on track. As I sipped my coffee on our small balcony, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Beth? The voice sent chills down my spine. Elaine, how did you get this number? I demanded, my hand shaking. Oh, darling, did you really think you could hide from me? Elaine's voice dripped with malice. I know everything, including your little indiscretion. My mind raced. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I saw you with him, in our old apartment. How could you do this to Jacob? I felt sick. Elaine, you're not making any sense. We don't live there anymore. She laughed, a chilling sound. Lies. I have proof. Photos. Jacob will be devastated when he sees them. The call ended abruptly. I stood frozen, my coffee forgotten. What photos? What was she talking about? My phone buzzed again, a text from Jacob. Got a strange call from Mom. She's saying something about you cheating? Call me ASAP. Panic gripped me. I dialed Jacob's number, pacing frantically. Beth? Jacob's voice was strained. What's going on? Jacob, I swear I haven't done anything. Elaine's lying. She sent photos, Beth, he interrupted, of you and some guy entering our old apartment yesterday. My mind whirled. That's impossible. I haven't been there in months. Jacob, you have to believe me. There was a long pause. I want to, Beth, but these photos... Listen to me, I pleaded. Go to the apartment. Talk to the new tenants. They'll tell you I wasn't there. Another pause. Okay, I'll go now. But Beth, if you're lying... The call ended, leaving me in agonizing silence. Hours passed like years. I called our old landlord, who confirmed that a young couple, Tom and Sarah, had moved in last month. I left frantic messages for Jacob, begging him to call me back. Finally, my phone rang. Jacob. It's worse than we thought, he said, his voice tight. Elaine broke into the apartment. The new tenants, Tom and Sarah, they're terrified. Elaine's been stalking them, convinced Tom is your lover. Relief and horror warred within me. Oh, God, Jacob, is everyone okay? They're shaken up, but fine. Beth, I'm so sorry I doubted you. Elaine, she's completely lost it. She photoshopped those pictures, made it look like you and Tom. Where is she now? I asked, dreading the answer. That's the thing. She ran when she saw me. The police are looking for her. But a sharp knock at our door cut him off. My blood ran cold. Jacob, I whispered. I think she's here. Beth, listen to me. Do not open that door. I'm on my way. Call 911 right now. The knocking intensified, turning into pounding. Beth, I know you're in there. Open this door, you homewrecker. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. Please, I begged the operator. She's trying to break in. I think she might hurt me. Police are on their way, the calm voice assured me. Stay on the line. A sickening crack echoed through the apartment. She was breaking down the door. Beth? Elaine's voice was unhinged. Come out and face what you've done. I retreated to the bedroom, barricading the door. Tears streamed down my face as I heard Elaine rampaging through our home. Please hurry, I whispered into the phone, praying that help would arrive in time. The bedroom door shuddered under Elaine's assault. I closed my eyes, wondering how our dream of a peaceful life had turned into this nightmare. As the door began to splinter, I realized with terrifying clarity that this confrontation with Elaine would determine not just my future with Jacob, but potentially my very survival. The bedroom door splintered, and Elaine burst in, her eyes wild with rage. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. You lying little tramp, Elaine screeched, brandishing a kitchen knife. You've ruined everything. I raised my hands, trying to keep my voice steady. Elaine, please, this is all a misunderstanding. I've never cheated on Jacob. I love him. She lunged forward, the knife glinting in the dim light. I dodged, feeling the blade whistle past my ear. Liar, she screamed. I saw the photos. I saw you with him. As I frantically looked for an escape, I heard sirens in the distance. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? Suddenly, Jacob's voice boomed through the apartment. Mom! Stop this now! Elaine froze, her head whipping towards the sound. I seized the moment, ducking past her and bolting for the door. But she was quicker than I expected. Her hand latched onto my hair, yanking me back with surprising strength. You're not going anywhere, she hissed in my ear. The front door burst open, and Jacob rushed in, followed closely by 2 police officers. The scene before them must have been shocking. Elaine holding a knife to my throat, both of us disheveled and panting. "Drop the weapon," one officer commanded, his gun trained on Elaine. For a moment, everything was still. Then Elaine's grip loosened. The knife clattered to the floor, and I stumbled away, collapsing into Jacob's arms. As the officers handcuffed Elaine, she began to sob. "I was just trying to protect you, Jacob. She was going to take you away from me." Jacob's voice was firm but sad. "No, Mom. The only one trying to come between us was you, and now you've gone too far." The next few hours passed in a blur. We were taken to the police station, where we gave our statements. Tom and Sarah, the new tenants from our old apartment, were there too, looking shaken but relieved. "I'm so sorry," Tom said, his voice trembling. "We had no idea who she was or why she was stalking us. When she broke in, we thought—" I reached out and squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault. None of this is." As we waited for the paperwork to be processed, Jacob paced the small waiting room. "I can't believe it came to this," he muttered. "My own mother, or whoever she really is." I stood, wrapping my arms around him. "We'll get through this, Jacob. Together." He pulled back, his eyes serious. "Beth, after everything that's happened, would you understand if I wanted to postpone the wedding?" My heart sank, but I nodded. "Of course. We can take all the time you need." To my surprise, he shook his head. "No, that's not what I meant. I want to marry you as soon as possible. Today, if we can. Life's too short, and I don't want to waste another moment." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Are you sure?" He cupped my face in his hands. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Just then, the detective handling our case approached. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Thompson, we're ready for you to sign the formal charges against Elaine Simmons." Jacob took a deep breath. "And after that?" The detective's expression softened. "She'll be held for psychiatric evaluation. Given the circumstances, it's likely she'll be committed for treatment." I squeezed Jacob's hand, knowing how difficult this must be for him. He squared his shoulders. "Let's do this." As we followed the detective, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the nightmare was over, sadness for the pain Elaine had caused, and hope for the future Jacob and I would build together. But as we rounded the corner, a commotion erupted. Shouts echoed down the hallway, followed by a familiar, chilling voice. "Jacob! Don't let them take me!" We froze, watching in horror as Elaine, somehow free from her restraints, barreled towards us. In that moment, I realized our ordeal was far from over. The true climax of our struggle with Elaine was yet to come, and it would determine the course of our lives forever. Time seemed to slow as Elaine charged towards us, her eyes wild with desperation. Jacob instinctively stepped in front of me, shielding me from his deranged mother. "Mom, stop!" Jacob's voice was firm, authoritative. "This ends now." Elaine faltered, confusion flickering across her face. "But Jacob, I'm doing this for us, for our family." In that moment, I saw the pain etched on Jacob's features, the weight of this twisted situation bearing down on him. I squeezed his hand, lending him my strength. "We're not family, Elaine," Jacob said softly. "You've been living a lie, and it's time to face the truth." Officers swarmed around us, restraining Elaine once more. As they led her away, her anguished cries echoed through the station. Jacob's shoulders sagged, and I held him close, feeling his body shake with silent sobs. The next few months were a whirlwind of court proceedings, therapy sessions, and rebuilding our lives. Elaine was committed to a psychiatric facility, her delusions finally addressed by professionals. Jacob struggled with guilt and grief, mourning the mother he never truly had. Through it all, our love deepened, tempered by the fire we'd endured together. We decided to have a small, intimate wedding, surrounded only by our closest friends and family. As I walked down the aisle, Jacob's eyes shining with tears of joy, I knew that every trial had been worth it for this moment. Weeks turned into months, and slowly we found our rhythm again. We bought a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the memories of our turbulent past. Jacob threw himself into his work, while I focused on my writing, channeling our experiences into a novel that I hoped might help others facing similar struggles. It was a crisp autumn morning when I felt the first flutter in my belly. I stood in our kitchen, hand pressed against my stomach, hardly daring to believe it. When Jacob came home that evening, I greeted him with happy tears and the news he'd been longing to hear. "We're pregnant," I whispered, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. As Jacob knelt before me, pressing his ear to my still flat stomach and whispering words of love to our unborn child, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now we were embarking on the greatest adventure of all, parenthood. The months flew by, our home filling with baby gear and the excited chatter of friends and family. We decided not to learn the baby's gender, relishing the surprise that awaited us. On a warm summer night, as the first stars appeared in the sky, our daughter made her entrance into the world. Holding her in my arms, Jacob beside me, I marveled at the perfect little person we had created. "What should we name her?" Jacob asked softly, stroking her downy head. I smiled, remembering all we had overcome to reach this moment. "How about Hope? Because that's what she represents, our hope for the future and the strength of our love." Jacob's eyes glistened as he nodded. "Hope. It's perfect." As we settled into life as a family of 3, I often reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The pain Elaine had caused seemed distant now, like a half-remembered nightmare. In its place was a deep appreciation for the peace we'd found and the boundaries we'd learned to set. One evening, as I rocked Hope to sleep, Jacob came in with a letter. "It's from the hospital," he said quietly. "Elaine, she's asking to see us." I held my breath, watching Jacob's face carefully. He smiled, a soft, sad smile. "I'm going to write back and decline. Our family, our real family, is right here." As he joined us, wrapping his arms around Hope and me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had faced our demons, confronted our fears, and emerged victorious. Our love had not only survived but thrived, stronger and more resilient than ever. Looking down at our sleeping daughter, I knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, we would face them together, as a family, built on trust, respect, and unbreakable bonds of love.
My husband's jealous ex-girlfriend was determined to ruin our relationship. She gave him an ultimatum: divorce me, or she'd cancel a $5 million deal. When he refused, her rage exploded. She grabbed a belt and brutally attacked me, leaving me injured and humiliated. But we weren't going to let her win. The next morning, when she woke up, she had no idea what we had planned in revenge. My name is Lily, and I'm in my early 30s. I've always believed that life would be nothing but smooth sailing, especially after marrying Mark, the man I loved deeply. Our life together was nothing short of perfect, or so I thought. We were happy, living in a beautiful apartment in Chicago, where I owned a thriving boutique clothing store. Mark worked as a real estate developer, and his career was also doing well. We'd been married for 3 years when everything started to unravel. Mark and I had always been a team. We worked hard, supported each other's dreams, and often attended social events where he introduced me to his colleagues and business partners. I'd always felt a sense of pride being by his side, as he had worked tirelessly to build his career. Our relationship was filled with laughter, late-night talks, and shared goals. We had a rhythm, a sense of togetherness that I thought could never be broken. But things started to change the moment I met Julia. I remember the first time I saw her. It was at one of Mark's birthday parties, a gathering of friends, colleagues, and people from his business world. I had never met Julia before, but the moment I walked into the room, I felt her eyes on me. Julia was Mark's ex-girlfriend, and I didn't know it at the time, but her presence would change my life forever. Mark introduced us as I walked into the party. "Lily, this is Julia," he said, with a tone I couldn't place. Julia was older than me, probably in her late 30s, with long, striking blonde hair and a sharp, confident look. She smiled as we shook hands, but something about her smile didn't seem genuine. There was an edge to it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, Mark and I were happy. Why should I worry about his ex-girlfriend? But as the night went on, Julia's actions started to make me uncomfortable. Every time I spoke to Mark, Julia would interrupt, making little snide comments. She was friendly, but not the kind of friendly you'd expect from someone who's genuinely happy for you. Her compliments felt laced with sarcasm, as though she was measuring me up, comparing herself to me. The moment that stood out the most to me that night was when Julia made a comment about my outfit. I had chosen a simple yet elegant black dress, one that I thought would be appropriate for the occasion. Julia, however, had no qualms about making me feel small in front of everyone. "Oh, Lily, I didn't know the library look was back in style," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. The entire table went quiet for a moment, and I could feel my face turn red. I smiled tightly, trying to brush it off, but the sting of her words stayed with me the entire night. Mark, of course, said nothing. I looked at him, expecting some sign of defense, but he remained silent. I didn't know it then, but that would be the beginning of a pattern. Julia would push, and Mark would do nothing to stop her. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I could tell something wasn't right. There was tension in the air, a tension I couldn't quite explain. In the weeks that followed, I started to notice Julia at more and more of our social gatherings. She was always there, lurking in the background, making veiled remarks whenever she could. Every time I saw her, she would find a way to make me feel insecure. Whether it was about my fashion choices or the way I carried myself, she always seemed to find something to criticize. I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable around her. I began to dread social events, not because of the people there, but because I knew Julia would be lurking, waiting for the opportunity to make me feel small. One particular evening stands out. It was a dinner party hosted by one of Mark's business partners. I was talking with a few of the wives when Julia strolled over, holding a glass of champagne. She eyed my outfit, simple, modest, and immediately made a sharp comment. "Oh, that's an interesting outfit," she said, eyeing my knee-length skirt. I didn't know the librarian look was back in style. The word stung more than I cared to admit. I had tried to keep my composure. "I think it's appropriate for a dinner party," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. Julia laughed. It was a high, sharp laugh that didn't sound kind at all. "Of course you do, sweetie. Not everyone can pull off high fashion like me." I bit my tongue, holding back the urge to respond, and excused myself from the conversation. My mind was spinning. How had she gotten under my skin so easily? Why was Mark letting her get away with this? After that night, things only got worse. Julia started posting pictures on social media, many of which were from our gatherings. But she always managed to crop me out of the photos or hide my face. I saw her captions, too, thinly veiled insults about my appearance and personality. It was cruel, and I hated seeing it, but Mark did nothing. One day, I scrolled through my feed and saw a post from Julia that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of her standing next to an unflattering one of me. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." Most of the comments favored Julia. It felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. I was hurt and humiliated. This wasn't just a petty rivalry anymore. Julia was trying to tear apart my life. That night, I confronted Mark. "We need to talk about Julia," I said as he walked in. He sighed and loosened his tie, obviously already knowing what I was going to say. "What has she done now?" he asked, already looking tired. I showed him the post. His face darkened as he scrolled through the comments. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, his voice low. I nodded, my hands shaking. "I want you to tell her to stay away from us. I don't want her at our parties anymore." Mark hesitated. "Amy, I can't do that. She's the daughter of an important business partner. I can't just ban her from social events. I'd risk the entire deal." I was taken aback. "So, I'm supposed to just deal with her bullying me?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "Of course not," he replied, pulling me into a hug. "I'll talk to her and make it clear that her behavior isn't okay. But you have to understand, I can't cut her off completely without jeopardizing my business relationships." I pulled away, feeling the weight of his words. "What about our relationship, Mark? Doesn't that matter?" His eyes softened. "Of course it does. You're the one I love. Angela is in the past. I chose you." His words should have made me feel better, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this was just the beginning of our problems. Little did I know everything was about to spiral out of control. The weeks that followed only confirmed my worst fears. Julia's behavior didn't just continue, it escalated. Every time we attended a social event, She seemed to find new ways to make me feel small, to remind me that I wasn't welcome in her world. But the worst part was that Mark, despite his promises, did nothing to stop her. It was as if he had become paralyzed by the fear of losing his business relationships. It was breaking my heart to see him so torn, but even more so to realize that I was losing him, little by little, to this woman who clearly had no boundaries. It was a Saturday evening, and we were at another dinner party hosted by one of Mark's business colleagues. I had seen Julia the moment we walked in. As always, she was in the center of attention, laughing a little too loudly, her eyes scanning the room for anyone who would listen to her. As Mark and I mingled, I found myself talking to a few of the wives in a quieter corner of the room. But then Julia came over, champagne glass in hand, a devilish smile on her face. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, "that's an interesting outfit." She made a pointed gesture toward my knee-length skirt and blouse. I didn't know the librarian look was back in style. I forced a tight smile, trying not to show how much her words stung. "I think it's appropriate for a dinner party," I said, my voice trembling slightly. She laughed again, louder this time, her words cutting through the room. "Of course you do, sweetie. Not everyone can pull off high fashion like me." Her voice was sharp, mocking, and I could feel the eyes of the others in the room on me. It felt like everyone was silently watching, waiting for me to react. I excused myself quickly, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Mark, of course, was nowhere to be found. It wasn't the first time he had failed to come to my defense, and I was starting to wonder if he ever would. Weeks went by, and Julia's attacks grew more frequent, more public. She began cropping me out of photos on social media, always making sure her face was front and center. In the captions, she made subtle digs about me, my appearance, and my place in Mark's life. It was clear what she was trying to do. She wanted to ruin me, make me look small and insignificant. But what hurt the most was that Mark didn't seem to care. Then one evening, things took a turn. I was scrolling through my phone, my heart sinking with each passing post. Then I saw it, a picture of Julia standing next to a photo of me, one that was unflattering and taken at the last event. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." Most of the comments were in favor of Julia. It was cruel, it was humiliating, and it was one of the worst things I had ever seen. I felt my blood boil. I couldn't keep ignoring this. I had to confront Mark. He needed to understand how far Julia had gone, how much pain she was causing me. When Mark got home that night, I didn't waste any time. "Mark," I said, showing him the post. "Look at this." He sighed, rubbing his temples as he scrolled through the comments. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. I could see how upset he was, but his face was still tense, his hands shaking slightly. "I want you to tell her to stop," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I want her out of our lives. I don't want her at our parties anymore." Mark hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes shifting uneasily. "Lily, you have to understand. Julia's the daughter of an important business partner. I can't just cut her off completely." I felt my chest tighten with panic. "So, you're telling me you're going to let her keep doing this? You're going to let her tear me apart?" "I'm not saying that," Mark said quickly, pulling me into a hug. "I'll talk to her, make it clear that she can't keep doing this. But you have to understand, if I cut her off completely, I risk losing this deal. You know how important it is to my business." The word stung. He was choosing his business over me. I pulled away from him, tears welling up in my eyes. "What about us, Mark? What about our marriage? Doesn't that matter to you?" His face softened, but there was still a hint of discomfort in his eyes. "Of course it matters. You're the one I love. But Julia, she's in the past. I chose you. I'll deal with her. I promise." But even as he said the words, I knew something wasn't right. It didn't feel like enough. And deep down, I feared that this wasn't just about Julia anymore. There was something much deeper going on, something I wasn't sure I could fix. Little did I know, things were about to get even worse. I wish I could say that things got better after Mark promised to handle Julia, but the truth is, they only got worse. I could feel the tension building between Mark and me. He was trying to balance his business dealings with Julia and his loyalty to me, but in the process, he was neglecting our marriage. Every day, I felt more like I was losing him, and Julia, with her calculated manipulations, seemed to have more power over our lives than ever before. Julia's presence at our social gatherings had become unbearable. Every event felt like an opportunity for her to take another jab at me, trying to tear me down little by little. But what really pushed me to the edge was what happened next. One night, we were at a cocktail party hosted by one of Mark's business associates. I had chosen a simple black dress, something elegant but understated. I didn't want to draw too much attention to myself. But the moment we arrived, I knew that Julia would find a way to make me feel uncomfortable. She was there, of course, in a tight red dress that seemed designed to grab all the attention. And it did. She immediately locked eyes with Mark, heading straight for him. "Mark, darling," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, completely ignoring me. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." I could feel my heart sink as she reached for his arm, her fingers lightly brushing against his skin. "Care to dance with me?" "For old time's sake," she asked, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place, something that made my stomach turn. Mark hesitated, but then he gently pulled his arm away, smiling politely. "Thanks, Angela, but I'm here with my wife. Maybe another time." For a moment, I thought I could breathe again. But the night didn't get any better. Julia didn't let up. She kept trying to steal Mark away from me, pulling him into conversations under the guise of discussing business, or asking for help with some imaginary problem. It was obvious what she was doing. She wanted him to herself, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. But the real breaking point came later. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. Another post from Julia. This one was even worse than the last. It was a picture of her, looking glamorous as usual, with a photo of me from the party in the background. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." I could feel my blood boil as I read through the comments, many of which sided with her, praising her beauty and their perfect match. It felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy everything Mark and I had built together. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I stormed into the kitchen, phone still in hand. When Mark walked in, I showed him the post, my hands shaking with anger. "Mark, do you see this? This is what she's doing to me. Do you even care?" He looked at the post, his face darkening with anger. But his expression quickly shifted to unease as he realized the full impact. "I'm going to talk to her," he said quietly, his voice strained. "You've said that before," I shot back, my voice rising. "And nothing ever changes. Why are you letting her control everything? Why aren't you standing up for me?" Mark's face twisted with frustration. "Lily, I'm trying to handle this. I don't want to lose this deal." But as he said it, I could see it, he wasn't just talking about the business deal anymore. He was afraid. Afraid of Julia, afraid of what she could do, and afraid of losing everything. But I was afraid, too, afraid that I was losing Mark, the person I loved, to someone who was slowly tearing our lives apart. I didn't know it then, but the next day would be the breaking point. The moment everything would change. The next day, things took a turn I never saw coming. I woke up feeling drained, like everything was starting to catch up with me. Mark's silence, Julia's relentless bullying, the constant tension in our home. I tried to push it all aside and focus on work, but the weight of the situation wouldn't leave me. It was as if the walls were closing in. Mark came to me later that afternoon with an uneasy look on his face. "Lily, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What now?" I asked, bracing myself. He hesitated before speaking. "Julia, she's threatening to cancel the $5 million real estate deal we've been working on unless I divorce you." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "She's giving me an ultimatum, and I don't know what to do." I felt the room spin. My throat tightened as I tried to process what he had just said. "She's doing what?" I managed to ask. "She's using the deal to force me to make a choice, her or you. She says if I don't choose her, She'll walk away from the deal, and I'll lose everything. I'm so sorry, Lily. For a moment, I stood there in stunned silence. Mark was caught between the woman he had been with before me and the life we had built together. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I wanted to scream at him for letting it get this far, but I couldn't. This was it, the breaking point, the moment when everything was on the line. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. Instead, I took a deep breath. Mark, we've been through so much together. You can't let her destroy us. You have to choose me. You have to choose us. He looked torn, his face a mixture of guilt and fear. But this deal is everything. It's not just about the money. It's about my career. It's my future. I shook my head, the words coming out in a rush. Your future is with me, Mark. We're partners in this life. You can't let her win. If you want to stand by me, we'll face her together. I could see the doubt in his eyes, but something in me snapped, and I knew I couldn't let him back down. We couldn't let Julia destroy what we had. Cancel the deal, Mark. We'll figure it out. We'll be okay. But we can't let her control us any longer. Mark finally nodded, though it was clear it wasn't an easy decision for him. He picked up his phone, and with shaking hands, he called Julia. I'm ending this deal, he said into the phone, his voice firm. I'm choosing my wife. I held my breath as he ended the call, but before I could say anything, Mark's phone rang again. It was Julia. You've made a huge mistake, Mark, she hissed through the phone. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your career, your life, everything you've worked for. And as for you, Lily, you'll never be good enough for him. I could hear the venom in her voice, but Mark just turned off his phone and looked at me. It's done, he said, his face full of resolve. But it wasn't over. The next day, Julia came to our house, furious. I was alone at the time, and she stormed in, her face twisted with rage. Without warning, she grabbed a belt from the coat rack and started hitting me with it. She screamed, I'll finish you, Lily. I'll make sure you're out of his life for good. I screamed for help, my body aching with the pain from the strikes. And just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the front door slammed open. Mark rushed in, his face full of shock and anger as he pushed Julia away from me. Stop it, Mark shouted. You're out of control, Angela. I was shaking, barely able to breathe from the pain and the shock. Mark grabbed me and led me to the couch, calling for help. He was frantic as he dialed 911. Soon, the police arrived and we filed a report showing them the CCTV footage that had caught everything. Julia was arrested, her face twisted in anger as they cuffed her. The legal consequences were swift. Julia was charged with assault and harassment, and her reputation, once protected by her father's wealth and influence, crumbled. She was no longer a threat to us. After everything was said and done, Mark and I took some time to heal. It was hard, but we were stronger for it. We learned what true loyalty meant. My boutique continued to thrive, and Mark's real estate business grew even stronger without the toxic weight of Julia hanging over him. We were rebuilding our life together, free from her manipulation. As for Julia, I heard rumors that her father sent her away to another state. She was cut off from the life she had tried so hard to ruin. Now, months later, as I sit here reflecting on everything that happened, I realize how much we've been through. How much we've overcome. We fought for each other, and in the end, we won. Our love is stronger than it has ever been, and we are finally free to live our lives without fear of betrayal or jealousy. Julia may have tried to tear us apart, but in the end, love and loyalty prevailed. And now we can truly move on. Together.
I found this crumpled note under your pillow. What does "I can't go on like this" mean, Ben? My husband froze, his eyes wide like a deer in headlights. After 30 years of marriage, I knew every nuance of his expression. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his brow furrowed ever so slightly, he was hiding something from me. It's nothing, Ava, just some nonsense I scribbled down. Ben snatched the note from my hand, crumpling it further in his fist. I crossed my arms, my heart pounding. Don't lie to me. We promised each other no more secrets, remember? He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. You're right, I'm sorry. It's just... He trailed off, averting his gaze. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tensions. I thought of our 2 grown children, Lila and Jessie, both out on their own now. Had our family become so fractured without me realizing? Ben, talk to me, I pleaded, my voice catching in my throat. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. He looked up at me then, his eyes brimming with a sadness I hadn't seen in years. I don't know if we can, Ava. I've been feeling so trapped, like I'm living someone else's life. His words felt like a physical blow. We'd built this life together, a life centered around his family's hardware store and the home we'd made for our children. How could he feel trapped in the very existence he'd chosen? What are you saying? I asked, my hands trembling. Are you unhappy with me? With us? Ben reached for me, but I stepped back, my mind reeling. It's not about you, Ava. It's about me and the choices I've made, the dreams I've let slip away. I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. We'd weathered so many storms together, only for him to crumble under the weight of some midlife crisis. But as I looked at my husband, truly looked at him, I saw the deep lines etched into his face, the weariness in his eyes. This was a man struggling under the burden of regrets and unfulfilled desires. In that moment, I realized our marriage had become a battlefield, with casualties on both sides. We'd been so focused on raising our children, on maintaining the status quo, that we'd lost sight of each other's needs. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Okay, Ben, I hear you. But we can't fix this if you don't let me in. No more secrets, remember? He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging with relief. You're right. I owe you the truth. As he began to speak, I braced myself for the impact of his words, knowing that our lives were about to change forever. Ben's confession hung heavy in the air between us. I felt like I was suffocating, gasping for breath as the weight of his words threatened to crush me. You're feeling trapped? I echoed, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. What about me, Ben? Have you ever stopped to consider how I might feel, living under the same roof as your mother? Eleanor. Just the thought of her name made my blood boil. From the moment she'd moved in after her knee surgery, she'd made my life a living hell. Her constant criticism, her blatant favoritism towards Ben, it was like she took perverse pleasure in belittling me at every turn. Mom's just set in her ways, Ben said weakly, as if that excused her behavior. You know how she is. I scoffed, shaking my head. Yes, I know exactly how she is. She's a manipulative, controlling woman who has never accepted me as part of this family. Ben opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, stopping him. Don't try to defend her, Ben. Not after everything she's put me through. Memories flooded my mind, unbidden. Eleanor's snide remarks about my cooking, her disdainful looks whenever I tried to assert myself. And through it all, Ben had stood by, either oblivious or unwilling to confront his precious mother. Do you remember our anniversary dinner last year? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. How she criticized the way I'd set the table, made snide comments about the food I'd spent hours preparing. Ben's face fell, and I knew he remembered. It had been one of the worst nights of my life, a supposed celebration turned into a humiliating ordeal. And what did you do? I pressed on, the words tumbling out in a rush. You just sat there, letting her tear me down in front of our own children. Lila and Jessie, bless them, had tried to come to my defense that night, but their efforts had only earned them Eleanor's wrath, further fracturing our already strained family dynamics. I'm sorry, Ava, Ben said, his voice heavy with remorse. I should have stood up for you, for all of us, but you know how my mother can be. No, Ben, I cut him off sharply. I don't want to hear excuses anymore. Not when you've let her walk all over me for years. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when Ben and I had been so deliriously happy. We'd had our whole lives ahead of us, full of promise and possibility. But somewhere along the way that spark had dimmed, smothered by the weight of Eleanor's constant presence and Ben's complacency. Do you remember our trip to Napa Valley? I asked, a wistful smile tugging at my lips despite the pain in my heart. We were so young and carefree, dreaming of all the adventures we'd have together. Ben's expression softened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Of course I remember. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. What happened to us, Ben? I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. Where did that happiness go? He reached for my hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know, Ava, but I want to find it again, with you. I want us to be a team, like we used to be. I searched his face, desperate to believe his words, to trust that he truly meant them. But the shadow of Eleanor's influence loomed large, a constant reminder of the forces working against us. As I looked into Ben's eyes, I knew that our journey back to happiness would be long and arduous. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a determination to reclaim the life and love we'd once shared, no matter what obstacles stood in our way. The weeks following Ben's confession were a whirlwind of emotion. As much as I wanted to believe his promises of change, the sting of his betrayal lingered like a persistent ache. It started with little things: a lingering glance when a woman walked by, a secretive smile as he checked his phone. At first I brushed it off, desperate to cling to the hope that we could salvage our marriage. But then came the late nights at the hardware store, the flimsy excuses about inventory checks and supplier meetings. I knew in my gut that something was amiss, but I was too afraid to confront the truth. That all changed the day Marie Wilkins walked back into our lives. I'll never forget the moment I saw her standing in our driveway, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to my rumpled house dress. She looked every bit the successful businesswoman she'd become, her confidence radiating like a force field. "Ava," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's been too long." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Marie had been Ben's high school sweetheart, the one he'd pined over before settling down with me. And now, after all these years, she was back in our lives like a specter from the past. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my heart pounding in my chest. Marie's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm back in town for good, and I thought I'd stop by and say hello to an old friend." An old friend. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Ben's distant behavior, his late nights, the guilty looks he'd been giving me. "You've been seeing my husband?" I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. To her credit, Marie didn't try to deny it. "Ben and I have reconnected, yes, but it's not what you think, Ava. We're just old friends catching up, reminiscing about the past." I wanted to scream, to lash out at this woman who had so casually waltzed back into our lives and upended everything. But deep down, I knew the blame lay squarely on Ben's shoulders. When he finally came home that evening, I confronted him head-on. "Marie stopped by today," I said, watching as the color drained from his face. Ben opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't bother lying to me, Ben. I know you've been seeing her behind my back." For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But then, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been meeting up with Marie, trying to recapture some of the excitement from our youth." The admission hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. All this time, while I'd been trying to salvage our marriage, he'd been indulging in some twisted midlife crisis. "How could you do this to me, Ben?" I asked, my voice thick with tears. "After everything we've been through together, how could you betray me like this?" He reached for me, but I recoiled from his touch. "Ava, please let me explain." But I didn't want to hear his excuses, his justifications. In that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of betrayal, a realization that the man I'd loved and trusted for decades had been living a lie. As I looked at Ben, I saw a stranger, a man consumed by his own selfish desires, willing to sacrifice everything we'd built for a fleeting taste of his past. And in that moment, I knew that our marriage, our family, had been irrevocably shattered. The only question that remained was whether we had the strength to pick up the pieces and rebuild from the rubble. The weeks following Ben's confession were a whirlwind of emotion. As much as I wanted to believe his promises of change, the sting of betrayal lingered like a persistent ache. We tried to move forward, to rebuild the tattered remnants of our marriage, but a palpable tension hung in the air. Ben's words of reassurance felt hollow, and I found myself questioning every gesture, every glance. It all came to a head during a family dinner when Lila and Jesse joined us. I'd hoped that their presence might help bridge the growing divide between Ben and me, but little did I know it would only serve to widen the chasm. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," Lila began, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Ben and I exchanged a glance, and I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the moment we'd find our way back to each other, to the love that had once bound us so tightly. But then Eleanor opened her mouth and everything unraveled. "Your father and I have been discussing his little indiscretion," she said, her words laced with venom. "And I, for one, think it's time he put an end to this nonsense with that woman." I felt the air leave my lungs, a sickening realization dawning. Eleanor knew about Ben's affair with Marie, and she was using it as ammunition in her never-ending quest to control our family. "Mom, stop," Ben warned, but Eleanor barreled on, her gaze fixed on me. "You've been so focused on your own hurt, Ava, that you've neglected your duties as a wife and mother." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the familiar tendrils of shame and inadequacy wrapping around me. But this time, something was different. This time I had an ally. "That's enough, Grandma." Lila spoke up, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You have no right to speak to Mom like that." Eleanor turned on her, her eyes flashing with fury. "How dare you take her side, after everything she's done to tear this family apart?" "She's not the one who betrayed Dad," Jesse chimed in, his jaw set in a defiant line. "That was you, Grandma, and him." The words hung in the air, a damning indictment of the fractures that had formed in our once tight-knit family. I looked at Ben, silently pleading for him to take a stand, to choose us over the toxic influence of his mother. But he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face. In that moment, I knew that our marriage had reached a breaking point. The betrayal, the lies, the constant manipulation, it had all become too much to bear. And as much as I loved Ben, as much as I wanted to believe in the promises of change, I knew that we couldn't move forward until we confronted the source of our turmoil head-on. "Ben," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sadness and resolve, "we can't go on like this. Something has to change." He looked up at me, and I saw the weight of the world in his eyes. A silent acknowledgement passed between us, a recognition that our family was fracturing, and we had to make a choice. As I looked around the table at the strained expressions on Lila and Jesse's faces, at the defiant tilt of Eleanor's chin, I knew that this was the moment that would define our future. We could either crumble under the weight of our dysfunction, or we could rise above it, reclaiming the love and strength that had once bound us together. The choice was ours to make, and in that moment, I knew that I had to be the one to take the first step. The decision to leave my home, my life as I knew it, was one of the most difficult choices I've ever had to make. But in the aftermath of Ben's betrayal, I knew that I couldn't stay trapped in that suffocating existence any longer. I had to find a way to breathe again, to reclaim some semblance of dignity. That's how I found myself taking the leap, accepting a full-time position at the community center. It was a chance to immerse myself in a new world, one where I could rediscover my sense of purpose and self-worth. The work was demanding, but it gave me a renewed sense of accomplishment that had been missing from my life for far too long. In the months that followed, I found myself becoming a part of a vibrant community of women, each of us seeking solace in the shared bonds of our newfound independence. We would gather after our shifts, sharing stories over glasses of wine, and forming a sisterhood stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. It was there, among that circle of kindred spirits, that I first felt the stirrings of a long-forgotten dream. A dream that had been buried beneath years of domestic drudgery and the relentless demands of keeping a home. A dream that had once filled me with a sense of purpose and possibility. What if, I mused aloud one evening, as my new friends listened with rapt attention, what if I finally pursued that degree I'd always longed for? The idea took root, blossoming into a plan that would allow me to reclaim a piece of the identity I'd lost. With a newfound determination, I enrolled in the local community college, taking night classes that would finally allow me to achieve the dream I'd abandoned so many years ago. Suddenly, a whole new world opened up before me, a world where I could finally put my passions to use, where I could build a life on my own terms. It was a revelation that filled me with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. As the months passed, my confidence grew. I found myself thriving in my new role, embracing the challenges that came with juggling work and school. And with each accomplishment, each new milestone, I felt the shackles of my former life slip away. My new friends cheered me on, celebrating each small victory with me over glasses of wine that grew cheaper by the day. They became my tribe, a support system that buoyed me through the darkest days when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. It was through their encouragement that I finally decided to take the leap and apply to the local university to complete my degree. A dream I had long since abandoned finally became a reality, and with it, a new path opened up before me. In that moment, I knew that I had reclaimed a piece of myself that had been missing for far too long. A piece that had been slowly chipped away by the demands of keeping a home, of being a provider. The possibility of what my life could become filled me with a sense of hope and possibility I hadn't felt in years. That night, as I poured myself a glass of the cheapest wine I could find, I raised a toast to my newfound independence. A new life was calling, one that was entirely my own. The weight of Eleanor's control over the family had been slowly suffocating me, but with Ava's newfound independence, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could forge our own path forward. That's when I knew I had to take a stand against my mother's manipulation, for the sake of my own future, and Ava's. It started with the little things, standing up to Eleanor's criticisms, asserting my own identity. And then as my confidence grew, I began to envision a life without her looming presence, without the weight of her expectations. That's when I made the decision to cut ties with Eleanor, to break free from the cycle of control that had defined our family dynamics for far too long. It was a difficult choice, but one that felt necessary for my own growth and for Ava's sense of self-determination. With a newfound sense of purpose, I took the first steps towards building a life without Eleanor's influence, paving the way for a future where Ava and I could forge our own path together. In that moment, I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on with Ava by my side. It was a new beginning, a chance to redefine ourselves and our future, free from the burdens of the past. As we moved forward, I felt a sense of excitement and determination, knowing that we were building a life on our own terms, with a foundation of respect and partnership. The weeks following my confrontation with Eleanor were a whirlwind of emotion. Ben and I found ourselves navigating uncharted territory, trying to rebuild the foundations of our marriage on a bedrock of honesty and mutual respect. It wasn't easy. Years of resentment and hurt had taken their toll, leaving deep scars that would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that we could forge a path forward, free from the toxic influence of Eleanor's manipulation. Ben, to his credit, seemed determined to make amends. He was open and remorseful, acknowledging the ways in which he had failed me, failed us, by allowing his mother to wield such control over our lives. "I was weak, Ava," he confessed one night as we sat together on the porch, the cool evening breeze offering a respite from the emotional turmoil we'd been grappling with. "I let her get into my head, and I lost sight of what really mattered." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We both made mistakes, Ben, but what matters now is that we're willing to fight for each other, for our family." He nodded, his eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes, Ava. No more secrets, no more letting my mother dictate our lives." In the weeks that followed, we worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. We went to counseling, laying bare the wounds that had festered for far too long. And slowly, gradually, we began to find our way back to each other. But just as we were starting to gain our footing, a curveball came hurtling our way, one that threatened to upend everything we'd been working towards. It started with a phone call from the nursing home where Eleanor had been staying. She'd suffered a minor stroke, they told us, and while she was stable, the prognosis was uncertain. Ben was beside himself, torn between the desire to stand by his mother in her time of need and the lingering resentment he felt towards her manipulative ways. "I don't know if I can do this, Ava," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything she's put us through, how can I just show up and pretend like nothing happened?" I understood his hesitation, his anger. Eleanor had inflicted deep wounds on our family, and the scars were still raw. But in that moment, I knew that we had a choice to make. A choice that would define the path forward for all of us. "Ben," I said, taking his hand in mine, "this is your chance to break the cycle, to show Eleanor that you're not going to let her control you anymore, but that you're still willing to be there for her as a son should." He searched my eyes, looking for reassurance, for guidance. And in that moment, I knew that the decision rested squarely on my shoulders. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," I promised. "But think about what kind of man you want to be, what kind of example you want to set for our children and grandchildren." Ben was silent for a long moment, weighing the gravity of the situation. And then, with a deep breath, he made his choice. "I'll go to her," he said, his voice resolute. "But not as the dutiful son she's always expected. I'll go as my own man, on my own terms." As I watched him gather his things, a sense of pride swelled within me. This was the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago, a man of strength, of integrity, who was finally ready to forge his own path. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as true partners, united in our determination to build a life defined by love, respect, and the freedom to choose our own destiny. The decision to move Eleanor into a care facility was one of the most difficult choices Ben and I had to make. On one hand, the thought of entrusting her care to strangers felt like a betrayal of the familial bonds that had once held us together. But on the other, the weight of her manipulation and the toll it had taken on our lives was a burden we could no longer bear. In the end, it was a decision born of necessity. A recognition that for our family to truly heal, we needed to establish boundaries and create a space where we could rebuild without the constant specter of Eleanor's influence looming over us. The day we moved her into the facility, a palpable tension hung in the air. Eleanor, ever the master of manipulation, alternated between bouts of feigned frailty and biting remarks, her words aimed like daggers at the heart of our newfound resolve. "You'll regret this," she hissed as Ben and I helped her settle into her new room. "Mark my words, you'll come crawling back, begging for my forgiveness." But Ben, to his credit, remained steadfast. "This is for the best, Mother," he said, his voice tinged with a sadness that betrayed the depth of his internal struggle. "We all need a chance to start over, to heal." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "Start over? You think you can just erase decades of history, of the sacrifices I've made for this family?" I placed a gentle hand on Ben's arm, a silent reminder that we were in this together, united against the forces that had once threatened to tear us apart. "No one is erasing anything, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm but firm. "We're simply creating the space we need to move forward, on our own terms." She scoffed, her disdain palpable. "Your terms? Don't make me laugh. You'll see, Ava. In the end, you'll come crawling back, just like everyone else." With those parting words, she turned away from us, her shoulders hunched in a posture of defiant resignation. It was a bitter farewell, but one that felt strangely liberating. As Ben and I left the facility that day, hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden we'd been carrying for far too long finally set down. In the weeks and months that followed, we worked tirelessly to rebuild our lives, to forge a path forward that was defined by our own choices, our own desires. Ben visited his mother regularly, but always with a newfound sense of boundaries and self-respect. And slowly, gradually, the fractures that had once threatened to tear our family apart began to heal. Lila and Jesse, inspired by our journey, found their own paths. Lila pursuing her dreams of becoming a chef, Jesse embracing the role of devoted husband and father. And through it all, they remained a constant source of support, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained us through even the darkest of times. As for Ben and me, we rediscovered the love that had first brought us together, that had carried us through the challenges and triumphs of decades past. We learned to communicate openly, to navigate the complexities of our relationship with honesty and compassion. And in those quiet moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm us, we would remind each other of the strength we'd found in our journey, the resilience that had carried us through the storm and into the calm waters of a new beginning. We rebuilt from the ashes, I would whisper to Ben as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. We're a stronger family now, defined by love and respect. And in those moments, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a life that was truly our own.